there's a whole list of cemeteries, so if you want to do any kind of cemetery searching, they list cemeteries, and a lot of times the cemeteries have had their population listed. So you go to the cemetery and all the people who are buried there are listed. And, you know, in some cases, you know, the plot locations and that kind of thing, too. In it along, I'm going to digress for a second and tell you one of the other stories in my family. When my father-in-law died, and he lived here in Palmyra, in and amongst all his things was a medallion about so big. And this medallion had A.J. Beardsley, 10th New York Cavalry, and the year for the Civil War on it.
Mm-hmm.
And we had no idea where this came from. Beardsley is my mother-in-law's maiden name. Why this ended up in their house, and both of them are dead now, so I have no way of finding this out. So I did.
The unit my great-grandfather was in.
Yes, exactly. That's how we're connected, okay? And so I did a little bit of searching on, you know, the internet for the 10th New York Cavalry. I did some searching for A.J. Beardsley. Found that he was, in fact, in the 10th New York Cavalry, where it started. It was in Palmyra, New York, and you know, that he lived down there at the time. I found how, you know, he died. He was a prisoner of war. And on Belle Isle. So my son, who now lives in Richmond, on one of the visits down there, we toured Belle Isle. We found his cemetery in a Richmond cemetery. We found his plot, his tombstone, and then subsequently, since getting on Ancestry, we have now figured out where this person connects to our family. It's back generations, and then so it's my husband's cousin of, you know, 5th generation removed or something like that. Cool. But you know, that's one of the little mysteries of, you know, that you can get hooked on in these genealogy searches, just by the fact that this coin turned up in, you know, his little collection of coins. It turned out it was a military ID. The original, you know, during the Civil War, they started using these coins as dog tags. Prior to that, they didn't use anything. So, I digress. You know, living in Ontario, this is coming up to 29 years now. As I was researching the book that I wrote for the bicentennial of the town, came across the name Norman Meaker. Well, my husband's Norman Meaker. So why is there another Norman Meaker in the town? It turns out that there was a Norman Meaker. We went to the cemetery, took a picture, there's the tombstone, and then it took me another year and a half to make that tie to our family. It turns out the name, Norman Meaker is not a very common name. It turns out that there are 3 Norman Meakers in the family tree. My husband, an ancestor who was in the Civil War, and then this Norman Meaker who lived in Ontario. And, you know, finding the records through these tombstones. So we've gone back to this little town just south of the border of New York and Pennsylvania, Brackney Cemetery, which is about 90% Meakers in the cemetery. So, cemeteries are really helpful. And again, the lists here, going back to where my story started, the list here will list the cemeteries in the county, and obviously not everything is recorded, because this site is all voluntarily done. The other issue comes, and you have this problem as you look through. My husband's name is Meaker, M-E-A-K-E-R. Well, back in the family history, it's M-E-A and then M-E-E. Even siblings within the same family, one brother M-E-A, one brother M-E-E. Why, I have no clue. The other issue is, in some of the documents that you get, especially if you try to look at census records, you got to realize census records were taken by a volunteer going door to door. They'll knock on a door and say, who lives here? And the person will say, Johnny, Sue, and Mary live here. Well, depending on how fast the person writes the names Johnny, Sue, and Mary down, Mary can turn into Marion, you know. It could very easily get converted along the way by the census taken, from the oral, what they heard from the person say. And the second thing is, then Ancestry and some of these sites are transcribing those original documents. And so then you get the transcribers' thoughts. And some of them may be right and some of them may be wrong. Again, going back to this Norman Meaker. In the census records, I forget, 1870, I think, instead of Norman Meaker, it's Choman, C-H-O-M-A-N.
Oh.
Well, if you look at the original document, the way it was written in the big swirly thing, the N looks like a C, H.
Oh. Yeah.
And so the person who transcribed it said C-H-O-M-A-N. It's the same person. So you really have to be an investigator and, you know, document these things. If you know what's accurate, sometimes you can go back and make the correction. Ancestry will allow you to do this, and so will these other places. If you know that something is wrong, you can tell them. And I thought Robert Landon lived, you know, far, far away. Like Helen lives in Missouri. And I figured, well, Robert lives somewhere way far away, too. This email from Robert finally had his home address on it. Pittsford, New York.
Maybe you're relation to me.
So
I had an Uncle Winfield Landon from Rochester.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
We'll have to check. We had a date. We actually got together at Panera Bread in Webster, and you know, he shared his stuff, and a lot of the records that are on Ancestry is, you know, a combination of both his work and my work and Helen's work. So between the three of us, we keep pulling in stuff together. He does things, you know, primary source documentation. He goes to libraries and historical societies and cemeteries and does a lot of the legwork that way. Takes pictures, has piles and crates of documentation, whatever. But bless his sweet heart, he posts it on the internet. And that's the benefit of Ancestry. So if I look at this